mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. Wow. I mean, holy cow. The first half of 2020 is behind us. If anyone expected a dull, uneventful start to the decade, they must surely be disappointed. Who predicted that racism would be at the forefront of the news, along with the behavior of some police officers who killed the very people they promised to protect and serve? How many of us knew what a pandemic was, much less experienced one? It's been over 100 years since the Spanish flu devastated the world. Now this year, in 6 months, we have gone through self-quarantine, social distancing, mandatory face masks, Zoom meetings, and curbside Eucharist. Instead of getting married in a church, my son and his new wife got married in a courthouse. They postponed the celebration until sometime next year when it might be safe. My disappointment, although real, cannot compare to that of those who have lost their jobs or their loved ones during this pandemic. And just when we thought it was safe to go outside again, COVID-19 cases have come back with a vengeance. Today's morning prayer service was supposed to be our first live service since March. But we are now at least a month away from having a normal service again. All in all, our world has been severely disrupted, and for many of us, it has sucked. The promise of a new decade quickly vanished in the face of secular disruptions and traumas. So in times like these, how do we find good news? 2,000 years ago, Jesus found himself dealing with his generation. He accuses them of acting like children. They put down John the Baptist for proclaiming the coming of the Lord, accusing John of being possessed by a demon. They criticized Jesus as a glutton and a drunkard for eating and drinking with tax collectors and sinners. I guess tax collectors are a special category of sinners. They would ultimately have Jesus arrested and executed, only to have him return 3 days later. How did Jesus react to his times? He thanked his Father for hiding wisdom from the wise and sharing it instead with the infants. What did he mean by this? I think he's telling us that the wise, the intelligent, the leaders of his time were blinded to the reason for Jesus' presence. The Pharisees were so preoccupied with upholding the status quo, the law, they couldn't even consider that what Jesus taught was valid. How would caring for disadvantaged members of society give the leaders more power? They obviously have not taken the words of Psalm 145 to heart, where it says, "The Lord is loving to everyone, and his compassion is over his works. The Lord upholds all those who fall. He lifts up those who are bowed down." That sure seems easy for me to grasp. Why couldn't the Pharisees comprehend it? It also fits perfectly with what Jesus proclaims in today's reading from Matthew. "Come to me, all you that are weary and carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest." Jesus offers us refuge in these times of increased stress and trauma. If we cannot face today's problems on our own, we can turn to Jesus and his teachings for comfort and solace. The law of Moses may have worked for the Hebrews for centuries, but Jesus offered a new path, a better path. Compared to what the leaders of his day required of the people, Jesus' yoke was indeed much lighter and easier to bear. Jesus says, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." You will find rest for your souls. Does that sound like good news to you? It certainly does to me. I've been carrying the burden of a divorce that seems to never end. We saw the judge at the end of April and came to a verbal agreement. The judge asked for it to be written up and signed off on by all parties. We drew it up, and now, 6 weeks later, my wife and her lawyer refused to sign it. I can't hardly take it anymore. The lack of finality is just overwhelming, and I'm unable to move on with my life. But when I hand this distress and anxiety over to Jesus, I feel the weight on my shoulders lifting. It's like my yoke is being replaced by Jesus' yoke. What are you facing today that would be easier with Jesus' help? What can he do to help you rest your soul? And what can you do to spread his word and ease the lives of your fellow man? After all, the burden of his yoke is light, but you still need to support it. Amen.
Amen.